Great, thank you.
Yes.
Now, we live in interesting times now because there's a lot
You always live in interesting times. They're just differently interesting.
Right. The idea that we can't agree about what is true in a sense. So there's a couple of different areas where this is showing up. One is in the idea of science. Even though we've advanced very far technologically, many people do not believe in science, and it causes a conflict with those that do.
Yes.
What can you say to us about knowing how to deal with that?
Well, again, you're not only experiencing the idea of different beliefs, but you might even be experiencing the idea of different realities, literally. So some people simply may not have a perception of the reality that another person has. However, in a lot of those cases, the idea simply comes from what we have just said, that there may be no real honesty in their self-investigation in terms of their belief systems. They may have great fear or have been trained to have fear as a reaction to certain things because of the definitions that they've been taught to attach to those things and what it means about the person, who may feel powerless, who may feel uneducated, who may feel unworthy, who may feel less than, so that they're unwilling to explore things that would put them in touch with the fear-based belief systems that they're attempting to avoid. So this is why, again, it's so very important to have this great honesty in your self-evaluation, because most people will generally find, if they are willing to investigate themselves deeply with great honesty and integrity, that they have simply been afraid to allow certain ideas into their lives because of what they think it means about them if they do so, or that they may find themselves unable to cope and find themselves lacking or wanting for being a more expanded consciousness. So there will be a lot of avoidance of things in a variety of ways. And I'm not just necessarily talking about one side or the other. This can happen in any particular direction. And again, this is why it's so important to have great honesty and a willingness to explore why someone might reject something or why someone might hold on to an idea a little bit harder than they otherwise might. It's always going to start with the idea of honest investigation of what you believe to be true in relation to that thing about yourself and your self-worth.
So also in the area of conspiracy theories, a lot of people are attracted to that. And is the idea that if someone is focused, highly focused on conspiracy theories, that they will generate that reality for themselves?
Of course. In fact, that's what conspiracy theories rely on.
Because are they generally negative beliefs, conspiracy theories?
Well, you can really call anything a conspiracy in the broadest sense of the term, as long as more than one person goes along with the idea, whether it's positive or negative. That's just a general idea, because the original root word conspire simply means to breathe together, to have the same ideas, to have the same thoughts that reinforce one another, and to move in a certain direction with more than just yourself, with other people who are conspiring with you to move in that direction. But there can be positive conspiracies and negative conspiracies. So the idea again comes down to, are these based on fear-based beliefs, or are they based on love-based beliefs, joy-based beliefs, empowering beliefs or disempowering beliefs? Beliefs that allow you to feel you are being controlled or manipulated or pushed in a certain direction that may not necessarily be to your benefit, or whether they are allowing you more freedom to choose and expand your consciousness as you see fit.
So when people use that term, going down the rabbit hole,
Yes.
how would you describe, what is that? Is that like falling into a belief that you can't verify is true and then allowing that to become your guiding principle?
It can be. The term falling down the rabbit hole usually means that once you have locked into a particular belief system, especially one that might be actually fundamentally negative, it's going to spiral you downward energetically in such a way to make it more challenging to find your way out of it. Because again, it's not necessarily going to be the kind of belief system that gives you the freedom to know you can choose other belief systems. You become locked into a particular belief system energy, and the negative ones make it much more challenging to know that there's even a chance of finding your way out.
So, what is like mind control? Is there such a thing? And why are people thinking they're susceptible to mind control?
Well, again, when an individual has an incredible lack of self-worth, they always look to some other authority to define their life for them. And because they feel abandoned or lost without that kind of authoritative input, they feel like they are adrift or disconnected without someone else to guide them. They will usually swallow anything that comes along that makes them feel as if someone is going to give them a purpose which they have been unable to give themselves.
Okay, so if you're trying to discern between censorship versus community, self-governing behavior, let's call it that.
Yes.
What is a good way to determine whether your beliefs or your positions are being censored, or if it's simply an idea of the greater good and whether or not a certain way of speaking might be inciting violence?
Yes. Well, some of this also will come down to the actual physical, or shall we say, sociological laws that you have instituted as part of your society. Some of it will be determined based on the laws you have created for yourselves to guide yourselves. Some of it will be based, again, on the clear understanding of what it is that you're actually connecting to within yourself and whether that energy is mechanically positive or negative. So again, it's about having the awareness, the wherewithal, the clarity, the discernment, the compass within yourself to understand when you are sharing information in alignment with what you typically refer to as the greater good, or whether you are actually going against the grain, against the flow of your true self, and disguising it maybe as the idea of the greater good. But again, real honesty would be able to tell the difference.
Okay. Thank you. That's very clarifying.
All right.
There's some questions about the galactic world.
Yes.
One question is, what is the Interstellar Alliance, and is it different from the Galactic Federation of Worlds?
Not necessarily. Again, it's a loose reference to a collective of a number of civilizations, and there are actually several. So one thing may call itself, in your language, a interstellar alliance, as we often do. Sometimes other galactic, shall we say, gatherings or collectives may refer to themselves as a different term, a collective, a federation, what have you, a council. It really doesn't matter overall, although it is important to recognize that there may be different collectives within even your galaxy.
Now, one person mentioned that in their heart they feel like in galactic life there's no need for alliances or federations. In other words, that the vibrational level is higher, and so what we perceive as a documented group or something is actually on a spirit level more about connecting vibrationally to beings of a similar ilk.
Yes, we don't have the idea of hierarchical governments in the way that many people on your planet think of it. So, yes, sometimes you might impose the human concept of hierarchies and certain kinds of organizational principles on what we refer to as an interstellar alliance, when in fact it is, as our civilization is, based more on simple synchronism, where like vibration works with like vibration very automatically and synchronistically, and simply recognizes that there is a commonality of overall vibration among a particular gathering or group of individuals or civilizations. It's nothing absolutely formal. There can sometimes be certain gatherings and so on and so forth that might represent the idea or sharing of a different direction or a new idea. and the others get to decide whether they align with it or not. But the idea simply is it's much looser than you might think. It's more based on synchronism and knowing how things work than it is in imposing a particular formal structure on these civilizations.
So, how far is your ship right now above Sedona?
About 3,000 of your miles.
Okay, and you did mention something earlier about the window of contact. Has the window of contact changed?
Well, yes. We have mentioned that because of certain changes going on now in your global society, whereas the beginning of the window of contact used to be your year of 2025, it is now 2023, so 2 years earlier.
And this just happened recently?
Yes.
Okay. And I know you interact with a lot of civilizations. So
Yes.
Are there any names that you can share with us that other civilizations call you?
Call us?
Yes, you specifically, I think.
Generally, although there are some exceptions here and there depending upon their culture, you will find that in whatever way they communicate, whatever language they may use or telepathic understanding they may have, most of them refer to us in some way, shape, or form as the halfways or the messengers.
So some individuals are asking about how to handle grief, how to
Yes.
go through that process of heartbreak in an easier way than typically we would experience here on Earth.
All right. Well, of course, first and foremost, it's all right if you allow yourselves to grieve, because it can be a process of letting go and expanding and reaching out and connecting on a different level. In most cases, the idea of grief is really nothing to do with the person that has gone on. It has more to do with the idea of the people that have, in your terms, been left behind in physical reality, because they have a wish to expand, they have a wish to understand their connection more to spirit. And so in some senses, they may experience the concept of sadness at having the idea of someone having expanded beyond them. And the belief that goes with it is the inability, again, not true inability, but the belief of inability to maintain that relationship. With more understanding, with more discernment, with more expansion of consciousness, grief will diminish. Because the idea is that you remain connected because you can stretch out with your senses and still communicate with those who are now in spirit, or things that you believe you have lost. When you understand there really is no loss, but only change, only shifting into a different state, then grief will be diminished because nothing really has been lost in your definition. You are not left behind, you are not abandoned, you are not bereft anymore. Those definitions no longer apply when you can begin to perceive that you are actually still in communication with those things and those people that have gone to a different state, because you have expanded your consciousness to the point where you can do that. You realize that. You're more aware of that. Now, because of holding on to the idea that something has been lost or that there is a true disconnection, many times when spirits attempt to make a communication or a connection with people that are physical, people may still experience grief because they're holding on to those negative definitions of separation, whereas many times, much later, months, years later, when people might think of those people that have died and experience sorrow and grief at those moments, that may actually be a moment when that being is attempting to communicate and connect with you, but you're only going to experience the energy of the connection as grief and continue to do so because you're continuing to hold on to the negative definition that something has been lost or that there is a disconnection.
It does also come down to the idea of accepting that you have started a new chapter in your relationship with that person.
Yes. Very often, the timing of people going into spirit will actually be an invitation to stretch the consciousness of the people still in physical reality, to reach out, to connect to them, to expand their senses so that they can be more aware of the idea of spirit, and that those beings are still around, just in a different way. That it is an opportunity to expand the relationship and allow it to deliver gifts and understandings and information and energy that will serve the person in physical reality by allowing that person who has gone into spirit to be more of a guide.
And so when you do die, do you reconnect with the person that you loved or whoever you...
Well, very often, yes. But again, remember, you're not actually ever disconnected, but you become aware of the fact that the connection has never gone away. And yes, very often you will encounter them on the spirit level because, remember, you are all already on the spirit level. You never really leave it. That's more your natural state. Physical reality is an idea that a spirit has that it's no longer in spirit. But it is. Most of the being is in spirit and therefore in communication with that other being all the time, or at least often enough to know that there is always a connection. So when you pass, when you die, when you expand back into or awaken back into the fact that you never actually left spirit and you've been with that being all the time, then you realize that the idea that physical reality experience idea of having lost something was an illusion.
So another psychological question that people have has to do with reactions to negative information or information they're not happy about, or choices that they made that generate feelings of regret and rumination. Oh, woulda, coulda, shoulda. All those kinds of reactions to information.
Yes. But again, you're talking about emotional reactions that are the result of belief systems being held in the conscious mind or unconscious mind of that individual. So again, the idea is it's not about focusing on the idea of the emotional reactions so much as it is acknowledging that they're there, and if you prefer, using them to backtrack what kind of beliefs you would have to be buying into or holding on to for those particular emotional responses to have been generated. Because you have to know, if you understand how things work, that there can be no such thing as an emotion in a vacuum. You don't just automatically have an emotion to information or circumstances or situations. If you didn't have a definition of your relationship, positive or negative, to that circumstance, you wouldn't have any emotional response at all. So the idea is you can use the emotions that come up, not by ignoring them, but by acknowledging that they're there, and using them to get in touch with what you would have to believe is true about yourself in this situation in order to have the response or reactions that you're having emotionally. The idea is, again, to understand how these things work, what generates what, and to understand that the beliefs and the definitions always come first, whether you're aware of them or not. That's why the emotions and thought patterns and behaviors can be so valuable in being able to backtrack all the way back to what kind of beliefs would generate those kinds of emotions and thoughts and behaviors. That's what the belief systems use to reinforce themselves, to make themselves seem more real. They reinforce themselves by generating emotions so it feels real, by generating thought patterns that are in alignment with that particular belief system so that you think it's real, and by generating behaviors that go hand in hand with that belief system so that it really seems physically reflectively real, and thus it creates reinforcing experiences in physical reality to drive the point home that this belief now feels like it's true, feels like it's a fact, when in fact it's not a fact. It's just what the belief is generating to reinforce itself, to perpetuate itself, because beliefs have to do that in order for you to have a physical reality experience at all. If beliefs didn't reinforce themselves, the entire illusion of physical reality would just go poof, and you would never have a physical experience. So the idea is to understand that all those emotions that you're talking about, all the feelings that people talk about, are indicators of something you believe to be true about yourself. Because whatever information comes to you, if you understand that it's not true for you, if it's not in alignment with who you prefer to be and what you are, there would be no real negative reaction to it at all. It would be similar to the idea, as we have said before by illustration, of a total stranger coming up to you on the street and giving you information that you know has nothing to do with you because this person doesn't know you. So you don't really react to it per se in the way that you might by having information come from a familiar person, or by having information come in a way that was outside the expectation or insistence that you had, that certain things had to go a certain way. You wouldn't have the same reaction. So you have to understand that all these things, in a sense, can be treated like strangers who don't really know you. Then you get to decide what information and advice works for you and what can be applied by you to your life. And you get to decide what doesn't relate to you, what isn't your preference, by remaining neutral and objective in the same way you would if a total stranger gave you a piece of information. You would go, well, does this apply to me or not? This person doesn't really know me. Therefore, I get to decide what piece of this information is advice I can take and what piece has nothing to do with me.
And I was thinking of some advice you gave us a while back about, especially for those that have a choice of reacting very negatively instantly and not being able to control themselves in a sense. The
Yes.
idea of taking a moment of pause. Do you want to expand on that?
Well, again, that's your power. Anytime you find yourself reacting, and that's usually an indication that there's a belief that's unconscious, and taking a moment of pause to find out what that belief would be gives you the ability to bring it into your conscious mind so that you can decide whether that belief makes sense to hold on to or not, or whether it would be better served if you let it go. So when you find yourself reacting, enjoy a moment of pause. Take a step back and say, wait a minute, why am I reacting this way? What belief would be causing this kind of an emotional reaction so quickly? First of all, it must be something unconscious that I've bought into that I'm unaware of, so what could it be? Then you use your imagination to find out what you would have to believe is true in order to have had that particular emotional response. Taking those moments are the most important thing you can do because that's living in the moment. That's examining what's happening in the moment. That's staying in the moment. That's not suppressing it, ignoring it, rushing ahead to something else you think is better. That's staying right with the process. That is the most important process because it's all about knowing yourself, discovering yourself honestly, with integrity, deep diving into what beliefs must exist within your consciousness in order for you to be experiencing the emotional reactions you are, because you understand how things work, and therefore because you understand that this emotion couldn't have been there without a belief existing first.